The desert had already taken her blood. Now it was coming for her baby. Elena lay twisted against the burning rock, her dress torn, soaked in dust and dried fear, in her arms silent, a bundle too still, too light. Her son hadn't cried in hours. The sun scorched above. The wind didn't care. And death circled like a buzzard, waiting for the last breath to leave both their bodies. Her husband was gone. The wagon wrecked. The horses vanished. All she had left was pain and a child slipping away. Then footsteps. Soft, steady, not bandits, not angels, something in between. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a wasteland of thorns and broken dreams. Elena's wagon lay overturned 50 yards away, its wheels spinning lazily in the morning breeze. The horses were gone, the supplies were scattered. Her husband's body was nowhere to be seen. She pressed her face against her baby's forehead. Thomas hadn't cried in hours. His tiny chest barely moved. The fever was burning through his small body like wildfire, and Elena knew she was watching her son dying in her arms. Her thoughts were fragments of desperation. She remembered the bandits' faces, the way they laughed when they shot Marcus, the way they looked at her before deciding she wasn't worth the bullet. They had taken everything and left her with nothing but sand and silence. Elena tried to stand, but her legs buckled. A sharp pain shot through her side where the knife had found its mark. She looked down at the dark stain spreading across her dress. The bleeding had slowed, but the damage was done. She was dying, and she knew it. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace. Elena's throat felt like broken glass. She had no water, no food, no hope. But she held Thomas tighter, whispering promises she couldn't keep. That's when she heard it. The soft sound of footsteps on stone. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Her hand instinctively reached for the small knife hidden in her boot. The bandits had returned. She was sure of it. They had come back to finish what they started. But when she looked up, squinting against the glare, what she saw made her blood freeze. A figure emerged from behind the rocks, tall, lean, moving with the quiet grace of a predator. Dark hair hung loose around strong shoulders. Weathered hands gripped a rifle in the face. The face belonged to an Apache warrior. Elena had heard the stories. Every settler had tales of scalping and torture of women and children taken in the night of mercy that never came. The Apache stopped 20 ft away, studying her with dark, unreadable eyes. Elena clutched Thomas closer, her whole body trembling. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. But the stranger didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like he was listening to something only he could hear. His gaze moved from Elena to the baby, then to the blood pooling beneath her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The desert held its breath. Then the Apache took a step forward. Elena's mind screamed at her to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She was trapped between a rock and a man who could end her life with a single motion. All she could do was watch as he approached, knowing that whatever happened next would determine whether her baby lived or died. And in that moment, as the stranger's shadow fell across her face, Elena realized that everything she thought she knew about survival was about to change. The Apache crouched down slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. Elena's breath came in short, panicked gasps. Every instinct screamed at her to protect Thomas, but she was too weak to even lift her arms properly. The warrior's eyes weren't filled with the cruelty she expected. Instead, there was something else, something that looked almost like concern. He spoke softly in his own language, words that sounded like flowing water over stones. Elena shook her head, frantically pressing Thomas against her chest. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't hurt him. He's just a baby." The Apache paused, then spoke again, this time in broken English. "Water." He pointed to a leather pouch at his side. "Baby sick." Elena's mind reeled. This wasn't how the stories went. Apache warriors didn't offer water to dying settlers. They didn't speak with gentle voices or show concern for white children. But here was this man, his weathered face creased with what looked like genuine worry. He reached slowly for his water pouch, moving like he was approaching a wounded animal. Elena flinched, but she was too exhausted to pull away. The Apache uncorked the pouch and held it toward her. "Drink," he said simply. Elena stared at the offered water, her throat burning with thirst. It could be poisoned. It could be a trick. But Thomas was dying in her arms, and she was dying too. What choice did she have? She reached out with a trembling hand and took the pouch. The water was warm but clean, and it felt like liquid salvation pouring down her parched throat. She drank greedily, then carefully dripped some between Thomas's tiny lips. The baby stirred slightly, the first movement he had made in hours. The Apache watched intently, then spoke words Elena didn't understand, but his tone was urgent, almost commanding. He pointed toward the horizon, then back at Thomas. "Medicine," he said in English, struggling with the word. "Baby needs medicine." Elena looked where he was pointing and saw nothing but empty desert. But the Apache seemed certain about something. He stood and walked to the overturned wagon, examining the scattered supplies with practiced eyes. He returned with a piece of torn canvas and began fashioning it into a crude sling. His hands moved with surprising gentleness as he worked. Elena couldn't make sense of what was happening. Every story she had ever heard about Apache warriors painted them as merciless killers. But this man was trying to help her son. While the Apache finished the sling and approached again, he gestured toward Thomas, then toward himself. Elena's heart stopped. He wanted to take her baby. "No," she gasped, pulling Thomas closer. "You can't have him." "But—" The Apache shook his head and pointed to Elena's bleeding wound, then to the blazing sun overhead. He spoke rapidly in his own language, frustration creeping into his voice. Then he said something that changed everything. "Baby dies here. Baby lives there." He pointed toward the distant mountains. "Choose." Elena stared at him, her mind racing. He wasn't trying to take Thomas from her. He was trying to save him. But that meant trusting an Apache warrior with her child's life. And as Thomas's breathing grew more shallow, Elena realized she was about to make the most impossible decision of her life. Elena's whole world had collapsed into this single moment. The Apache stood waiting, his dark eyes fixed on her face. Thomas was growing weaker by the minute, his skin burning with fever. She could feel his tiny heart fluttering against her chest like a dying bird. The warrior's name was Ayana, though Elena didn't know it yet. What she saw was a man who moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in this harsh desert, someone who understood survival in ways she never could. Where Elena managed to ask, her voice cracking, "Where would you take him?" Ayana pointed toward a cluster of rocky hills in the distance. "Medicine woman heals children." He paused, searching for the right English words. "My sister." Elena's mind struggled to process this. an Apache medicine woman. The story she had heard spoke of dark rituals and blood sacrifices, but as she looked down at Thomas, she saw that his lips were turning blue. Whatever fever was consuming him was winning. Ayanna seemed to sense her hesitation. He knelt beside her again and gently touched Thomas's forehead. His weathered fingers were surprisingly tender. When he pulled his hand away, Elena could see the worry etched deep in his features. "Baby very sick," he said quietly. "White medicine too far. Apache medicine close." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible choice crushing down on her. Trust an Apache warrior with her dying son, or watch Thomas slip away in her arms while they both died slowly under the merciless sun. Her thoughts drifted to Marcus, her husband. He would have called her insane for even considering this. Marcus had always said that Apache were animals, that they couldn't be trusted. But Marcus was dead, and Thomas was dying, and this Apache warrior was the only hope she had left. Elena opened her eyes and looked directly into Ayanna's face. What she saw there wasn't the savage cruelty from the stories. It was the expression of a man who understood what it meant to watch children suffer. Will you bring him back to me?" she whispered. Ayanna nodded slowly. "Promise," he said. It was clear. The word carried weight for him. Elena's hands shook as she began to loosen her grip on Thomas. Every maternal instinct screamed against what she was about to do. But she could see the sun climbing higher, feel the heat becoming more brutal with each passing minute. If they stayed here, they would both be dead before nightfall. She lifted Thomas toward Ayanna, her heart breaking with every inch of space that opened between them. "Please," she whispered, "save him." Ayanna accepted the baby with reverent care, cradling Thomas against his chest like he was made of spun glass. He secured the infant in the makeshift sling, adjusting it until Thomas was protected from the sun. Then something unexpected happened. Ayanna reached down and slipped his strong arm under Elena's shoulders. "You come too," he said firmly. "Both live or both die." Elena stared at him in shock. She had assumed he would take Thomas and leave her behind to die. "That's what the story said Apache did." "But this man was determined to save them both." "I can't walk," Elena protested weakly, gesturing to her bleeding wound. Ayanna's response was to lift her effortlessly from the ground. Elena gasped as pain shot through her side, but she found herself cradled against the Apache's chest. Thomas nestled safely between them. As Ayanna began walking toward the distant hills, Elena realized that everything she thought she knew about the world had just been turned upside down. But behind them, hidden among the rocks where they couldn't see, 3 sets of eyes watched their departure with growing interest. The bandits who had left Elena for dead were returning to scavenge what remained. And they had just found something far more valuable than they expected. Ayanna moved across the desert like he was reading an invisible map. His steps were sure and steady, even while carrying both Elena and Thomas. Elena could feel the strength in his arms, the way he adjusted his grip to protect her wounded side without being told. The sun was climbing toward its peak, turning the air into shimmering waves of heat. But Ayanna seemed to know every shadow, every outcropping of rock that could provide momentary relief. He paused frequently to give Elena water and check on Thomas. During one of these stops, Elena studied Ayanna's face more closely. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent in harsh conditions. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, But there was something else in his expression, a sadness that seemed to go deeper than the desert itself. "Why are you helping us?" Elena asked quietly. Ayanna was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "I had son once," he said simply. "Fever took him, no medicine woman close enough." He looked down at Thomas. Could not save him. Elena felt her throat tighten. She understood now. This wasn't just about helping strangers. This was about redemption, about saving the child he couldn't save before. They continued their journey, but Elena began to notice something troubling. Ayanna kept glancing back over his shoulder. His jaw was tense, and his pace had quickened slightly. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Being followed," Ayanna replied grimly. "3 men on horses." Elena's blood turned to ice. The bandits. They had come back, probably expecting to find her body, and whatever valuables might remain. Instead, they had found tracks leading away from the wagon. "They want us," Elena whispered, remembering the cold cruelty in their eyes. Ayanna nodded. "Want woman? Want Apache scalp, big reward for both." The situation was becoming desperate. Ayanna was strong, but he was on foot and carrying 2 people. 3 mounted men would catch them long before they reached the medicine woman. Elena could see Ayanna's mind working, calculating distances and possibilities. His free hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt. "Put me down," Elena said suddenly. "No," Ayanna replied without hesitation. "You can move faster without me. Take Thomas and go." Ayanna stopped walking and looked directly into Elena's eyes. "Told you both live or both die. No changing." Elena was stunned by the fierce determination in his voice. This Apache warrior who owed her nothing was willing to risk everything to keep his word, but the sound of distant hoofbeats was getting closer. Ayanna's expression hardened. He surveyed the terrain around them, looking for defensible ground. About 200 YD ahead, Elena could see a cluster of large boulders that formed a natural fortress. "Can you hold baby?" Ayanna asked. Elena nodded, and Ayanna carefully transferred Thomas to her arms. Then he began running toward the rocks, his long strides eating up the ground. Behind them, the hoofbeats grew louder. Angry voices carried on the desert wind. As they reached the shelter of the boulders, Elena heard something that made her heart sink. One of the bandits was shouting instructions to the others. She recognized the voice. It was Jake Morrison, the leader of the gang that had murdered her husband, and he sounded like a man who had found exactly what he was looking for. Ayanna positioned Elena and Thomas behind the largest boulder, then checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. Elena could see him counting bullets, his face grim as he realized how outnumbered they were. The hoofbeat had stopped about 50 yards away. Elena heard Jake Morrison's growly voice calling out across the desert. Well, looks like our little dove didn't die after all." Jake's laughter was cruel and cold, "and she's made herself a friend, an Apache friend." Elena pressed Thomas closer to her chest, trying to calm his labored breathing. The baby was getting worse, his fever spiking in the desert heat. They needed to reach the medicine woman soon, but now they were trapped. "Here's what's going to happen," Jake continued. "You're going to send that Apache out here with his hands up. Then you're going to walk out real slow-like, and maybe we won't make this too painful for either of you." Ayanna's response was to raise his rifle and fire a shot that sent one of the bandits diving for cover behind his horse. The message was clear. "Apache dog," Jake shouted fury, replacing his mocking tone. You just signed your death warrant. Gunfire erupted from 3 different positions. Bullets sparked off the rocks around them, sending chips of stone flying. Ayanna returned fire, methodically making every shot count. Elena found herself in an impossible situation. She was wounded, holding a dying baby, trapped with a man she barely knew, surrounded by killers who wanted them both dead. If you were Elena, what would you do? Trust completely in Ayanna's fighting skills and stay hidden, or try to help him fight, even though you might put Thomas at greater risk? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you choose, because what Elena decided next would determine whether any of them survived the next 10 minutes. Elena made her choice. She carefully placed Thomas in a small depression between 2 rocks, where he would be protected from stray bullets. Then she reached for the small pistol she had hidden in her dress. Can you use that? Ayanna asked, noticing her movement. Marcus taught me, Elena replied, checking the cylinder. 4 bullets. Ayanna nodded approvingly. Wait for my signal. When I draw their fire, you take the one on the left. The plan was desperate, but it was their only chance. Ayanna counted down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. He stood up and fired rapidly at the center position, forcing Jake and his men to take cover. Elena rose and aimed at the bandit who had circled to their left. Her first shot went wide, but her second caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The woman's armed, the wounded bandit yelled, but Elena's intervention had given Ayanna the opening he needed. His next shot found its mark, and one of the bandits fell silent. Jake Morrison's voice rose to a roar of rage. Kill them both. I want that Apache scalp. The remaining 2 bandits pressed their attack, using their horses to charge closer to the rocks. Ayanna's rifle clicked empty, and he smoothly drew his knife. Elena had 2 bullets left. Thomas was burning with fever behind her, and Jake Morrison was circling around to a position where he could shoot down at them from above. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as the battle reached its climax. Elena could hear Ayanna's steady breathing. Beside her could feel his absolute determination to protect them both. But when she looked up at the rocks above them and saw Jake Morrison's silhouette against the sky, his rifle aimed directly at Thomas, Elena realized that even Ayanna's warrior skills might not be enough. Time seemed to slow as Jake's finger tightened on the trigger, and Elena had to make a choice that would haunt her forever. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. Elena's world narrowed to a single moment. Jake Morrison's rifle barrel gleamed in the sunlight, aimed directly at Thomas. Her baby lay helpless between the rocks, his tiny chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Without thinking, Elena threw herself forward, shielding Thomas with her body, just as Jake's rifle cracked. The bullet meant for her son tore through her shoulder instead, spinning her around and sending waves of fire through her already wounded body. Ayanna moved like lightning. His knife left his hand in one fluid motion, spinning end over end through the desert air. Jake Morrison's scream of triumph turned into a gurgle of shock as the blade found its mark between his ribs. The bandit leader toppled backward off the rocks, his rifle clattering down beside him. But the remaining gunman wasn't finished. He spurred his horse forward, riding hard at their position with his pistol blazing. Ayanna had no time to retrieve another weapon. He spread his arms wide, making himself a target to draw fire away from Elena and Thomas. Elena, bleeding from 2 wounds, now raised her pistol with shaking hands. She had 1 bullet, left 1 chance. The bandit was so close, she could see the hate in his eyes. See his finger squeezing the trigger that would end Ayana's life. Elena fired. Her bullet caught the horse in the chest. The animal reared up, throwing its rider hard against the rocks. The man hit with a sickening crack and lay still. Sudden silence fell over the desert. The only sounds were Elena's ragged breathing and Thomas's weak crying. Ayana knelt beside Elena, examining her new wound with gentle fingers. Bad Elena asked, though she could already feel the blood soaking through her dress. Bad enough, Ayana replied honestly, but not dying bad. Not yet. He worked quickly, tearing strips from his shirt to bind both her wounds. His hands were steady, but Elena could see the urgency in his movements. They had won the fight, but time was running out for all of them. Thomas's fever was worse now. The stress and heat of the battle had pushed his small body to its limits. When Elena touched his forehead, his skin felt like it was burning from the inside. How far to your sister? Elena asked weakly. Ayana looked toward the distant hills, calculating. 2 hours, maybe less if I run. Elena struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her shoulder. Then run, take Thomas, and go. No, Ayana said firmly. Told you before. You don't understand, Elena gasped. I'm slowing you down. Thomas needs medicine now. Not in 3 hours, because you're carrying me. Ayana was quiet for a moment, torn between his promise and the practical reality facing them. Elena could see the conflict in his dark eyes. Your sister will help him, Elena asked. Yes, she heals many children, Apache and white. Elena made her decision. She carefully lifted Thomas and placed him in Ayana's arms. Then take my son and save his life. But as Ayana prepared to leave, Elena heard something that made her blood freeze. More hoofbeats. Distant, but getting closer. Jake Morrison's gang had been larger than they thought, and the sound of gunfire had drawn the rest of them like wolves to wounded prey. Ayana's head snapped up at the sound of approaching horses. His warrior instincts immediately assessed the threat. From the sound, at least 4 riders, maybe 5 too many to fight while protecting a wounded woman and a dying baby. Elena saw the calculation in his eyes and knew what he was thinking. Go, she whispered urgently. Take Thomas and run. I'll slow them down here. With what Ayana asked, looking at her empty pistol in wounded condition. Elena's hand moved to Jake Morrison's fallen rifle. It was heavier than her pistol, but it was loaded. I'll make do, Ayana shook his head. You cannot fight 5 men alone. I don't have to win, Elena replied with quiet determination. I just have to give you time to get Thomas to safety. The hoofbeats were getting closer. Ayana looked down at Thomas, whose breathing was becoming more shallow by the minute. The baby's lips had taken on a blue tinge that spoke of time running out. For a moment, the Apache warrior was caught between 2 impossible choices. Save the baby and abandon the mother, or stay and watch both of them die. Elena reached up and touched his face with her good hand. This is what mothers do, she said softly. We sacrifice for our children. Thomas needs to live. Ayana, that's all that matters now. Ayana closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, Elena saw a depth of pain that went beyond words. She understood then that leaving her behind was tearing at old wounds, reminding him of all the people he hadn't been able to save. Promise me something, Elena said. Ayana nodded. Tell Thomas about his father when he's old enough. Tell him Marcus was a good man who loved his family. I promise. Ayana said, his voice thick with emotion. He carefully secured Thomas in the sling across his chest, then helped Elena position herself behind the rocks with Jake's rifle. She checked the weapon with hands that were steadier than she felt. "There's a trail through those hills," Ayanna said, pointing. "Hidden from horse riders. I can reach my sister's camp without being followed." Elena nodded. "Then go and don't look back." Ayanna hesitated for one more moment, then leaned down and pressed his forehead gently against hers. It was a gesture of respect, of honor between warriors. "You have Apache heart," he said quietly. "Thomas will know his mother was brave." Then he was gone, moving like a shadow across the desert, carrying Elena's son toward hope and healing. Elena settled in behind the rocks, Jake's rifle cradled in her arms. The hoofbeats were very close now. She could hear voices calling to each other, asking what had happened to Jake and the others. She thought about Marcus, about their dreams of building a life together in this harsh land. She thought about Thomas, praying that Ayanna would reach the medicine woman in time. And she thought about her own father, who had taught her to shoot when she was just a girl. Never waste a bullet on anger, he had told her. Save your shots for when they count. The first rider appeared around the rocks, his face a mask of fury when he saw the bodies of his fallen comrades. Elena's first shot took him clean off his horse. The others scattered, taking cover behind their mounts and returning fire. Bullets sparked off the rocks around Elena, but she stayed calm, picking her targets carefully. She had 8 bullets, left 5 men to stop, and somewhere in the distance, Ayanna was carrying her son toward salvation. Elena smiled grimly and took aim at her next target. Today was a good day to make bullets count. Elena's rifle spoke with deadly precision. Her second shot dropped another bandit, but the remaining 3 had learned to respect her aim. They spread out wide, using their horses as shields, trying to flank her position. Blood loss was making Elena dizzy, but she forced herself to stay focused. Each shot had to count. Each moment she held them here was another step Ayanna could take toward safety with Thomas. The bandits were shouting to each other, coordinating their attack. Elena could hear them planning to rush her from 3 sides at once. She had 6 bullets left to stop 3 desperate men. One of them broke cover, spurring his horse in a wild charge toward her rocks. Elena's shot caught him in the chest, but his momentum carried him forward. The horse stumbled and fell just yards from her position. 5 bullets, 2 men. Elena's vision blurred as she tried to track the remaining bandits. Her shoulder wound had reopened, and she could feel her strength ebbing away with each heartbeat. But somewhere in the distance, Thomas was getting the help he needed. That thought gave her the will to keep fighting. The last 2 bandits attacked together, coming from opposite sides. Elena swung her rifle toward the first one, but her hands were shaking now. Her shot went wide. The bandit's pistol cracked, and Elena felt a burning sensation across her ribs. She was hit again, but still alive. 4 bullets left. 2 men closing in. Elena steadied herself against a rock and took a careful aim. Her next shot found its mark, sending the bandit tumbling from his saddle. But the final man was almost on top of her now, his face twisted with rage. "You killed my brothers!" he screamed, raising his pistol. Elena's rifle clicked empty. She reached for Jake's pistol with her good hand, but she was too slow. The bandit's finger tightened on the trigger. Then an arrow sprouted from his chest. The man looked down in shock, then toppled sideways off his horse. Behind him, 3 Apache warriors emerged from behind the rocks, their faces painted for war. Elena stared in amazement as the warriors approached. The leader, an older man with silver in his hair, knelt beside her and began examining her wounds. "Ayana sent us," he said in clear English. "Said white woman, fought like Apache. Said she saved Apache child." Once Elena's heart leaped. "Thomas is he baby lives," the warrior replied with a slight smile. "Medicine, woman healed. Fever, strong boy, will grow tall." Tears of relief streamed down Elena's face. Thomas was alive, safe. That was all that mattered. The warriors worked quickly to bind her wounds and prepare her for transport. As they lifted her onto a makeshift stretcher, Elena looked back one last time at the battlefield where she had made her stand. "Will I see them again?" she asked. "Ayano and Thomas." The elder warrior nodded. "Ayano waits at camp. Says he has promised to keep. Says he will help you raise a strong son." Elena closed her eyes as they carried her across the desert. She had lost everything in this harsh land, her husband, her wagon, her old life, but she had gained something precious too. She had found that courage lived in the most unexpected places, that honor existed beyond the boundaries of race and tribe, and she had learned that sometimes being left for dead was just the beginning of truly living. 3 months later, Elena stood outside a small cabin at the edge of Apache territory, watching Thomas take his first unsteady steps. Ayana sat nearby carving a wooden horse for the boy who had brought 2 different worlds together. The baby who had nearly died in the desert was now a healthy, laughing child who called 2 people, mother and father. One white, one Apache, both bound together by a promise kept and a life saved. Elena had learned to speak some Apache words, and Ayana had improved his English considerably. They had built something new together, not just a family, but a bridge between 2 peoples who had been enemies for too long. Thomas would grow up knowing both worlds, carrying the best of each culture within him. And when he was old enough, Elena would tell him the story of the day an Apache warrior saved his life, and how sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected sources. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel now. Click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video now.